Good morning and good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Crossroads Inspiring Leaders of Tomorrow episode. Today's episode special guest at Crossroads is a green politician. Mr. Erik Solheim is a diplomat, peace negotiator, and a thought leader in all things sustainability. Erik has served as Undersecretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of UN Environment in Nairobi, Kenya. He's also a former Minister of the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment, as well as the Ministry of International Development, amongst other things. Thanks a lot, Erik, for joining us today. Very excited to have this conversation with you.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Erik, how did you begin your journey as a green politician? When you were younger, did you always aspire to do this?
Because when I was young, I had no idea that I would be involved in politics, but I had a big heart for the environment, for sure. Because living in Oslo, we could go walks in the forest and go skiing at winter in the forest. I mean, it's basically 20 minutes tram ride from the city center to 3 different forests. So it was easy to be out in nature. And in summer, I mean, those days, hardly any Norwegian had the money to go abroad. So we spent all the summers in Norwegian mountains where I was chasing the cows, and we could sometimes see a moose or a fox or a rabbit. And of course, there was an experience in nature, which gave you this love for nature, which stayed with you for the entire life, and which I found basically every human being deep down have that love for nature. It may be the Himalayas, or maybe the rice paddies of southern India, or Norwegian mountains, or the Great Lakes of America. There's so much nature to love, but basically everyone had this love of nature in them.
So the love for nature is what inspired you.
That was the starting point, and then of course gradually I came into politics. That was at the time of the Vietnam War. So the really big issue was to get stopped this completely unnecessary wars. A war is one of the most unnecessary and bloody wars in human history. 3 million people were killed, and the result after the war was exactly what it would have been without a war. The Vietnamese nationalists won, the United States of America lost, and I think it should also be a huge warning to say, Mr. Putin in Russia today, starting a war you normally always lose, and the costs are immense.
Absolutely. I think the aftermath, or even the issues about war, is affecting everyone, regardless of what kind of people they are, which region that they belong to. But I'm very curious about how you took this upon yourself and made it a career for yourself, right? So what's your advice to the younger generation, and especially on those that want to pave their career around green politics or anything around the same environmental domain?
I think starting point is to follow your passion. If you start being kind of careerist, looking into all the career opportunities, you will normally lose. I mean, it's when you really follow your passion, that's how you do what you are good at. And look, I mean, even in business, it's exactly the same. I mean, all the key people who started major businesses in the world, I mean, say Steve Jobs or Bill Gates in America, or Jack Ma in China, or whoever that, they started with the view of making the world a little bit better. They followed the passion for information technology, for data, and they became very, very good at it. So start with following your passion, be curious, look to what succeeds and try to get a good mentor. If you have a good boss, you will learn a lot from that person. But really, really don't plan a career step by step, but go all out for what you can be good at, because then you will be good at it.
Absolutely. And as a green ambassador, you've accomplished several things, right? Especially around the sustainable development goals. You've driven the introduction of the Nature Diversity Act to protect Oslo forests. You've opened 8 national parks, initiated a global program to save rainforests across Brazil, Indonesia, Guyana. But you've also worked with enterprises and tech businesses, right? So what's the best way that businesses can invest and contribute to making our planet greener and more sustainable?
To make change happen in society, I believe we need a theory of change. And I have a very, very clear theory of change, and I think it applies to most problems. You need 3 main factors: citizens, government, and business. when we look to the one big environment problem we did resolve a few decades ago, the hole in the ozone layer. No one's talking about that any longer because it is resolved. Start with citizens demanding change, forcing political leaders to do something. Then the political leaders came together with the Montreal Protocol, which solved the problem at the political side. But then, of course, the actual job was left to business, who invented all the new refrigerators or air conditioning systems, which did not destroy the ozone layer. And the same is today. We need all these three forces. But I believe in this political or this historical era, business now tend to be ahead of governments. In the United States, Microsoft, for instance, have promised not just to reduce or to be carbon neutral by 2030. They promised even to compensate for all emissions in the history of the company. In Europe, IKEA, the big furniture maker, by the way, I think they're also in Bengaluru and Hyderabad. They are much ahead of any government when it comes to a circular economy. And I could go on with many examples. But business is now driving the charge because they see enormous opportunities for creating jobs and prosperity by going green.
Awesome. You worked with a lot of governments even within India, I suppose. What has your experience been with, especially in government, with the Indian governments, the different state governments in India, and also businesses that you have collaborated with around sustainability goals?
Absolutely. I think India is at a very lucky moment because India at the center with Prime Minister Modi has a dedicated environmentalist. Look, he speaks about environment all the time. If you look to his heart-to-heart speeches with the Indian people or whatever he does, he's promoting solar energy, promoting green hydrogen, speaking about the value of nature. So Prime Minister Modi is really driving this at the center. But many of the state governments, Chief Minister Chauhan or the state of Madhya Pradesh is planting one tree every day. Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, N.K. Stalin, just established a climate council for the state and has promised to increase the tree cover of Tamil Nadu with 10% in the next decade. That's an amazing goal. So what I find interesting is that even if some of these politicians disagree on many other issues, I mean, Stalin and Modi do not see eye to eye on every issue, but on the environment, they are driving India together in a very positive direction.
Glad to hear your opinions on that. And currently you serve as the vice chair at the China Council for International Cooperation of Environment and Development. You're also the chairman of the advisory board for the Afroz Shah Foundation that fights plastic pollution through beach cleanups in Mumbai. You're also the chair of GH2 Green Hydrogen Organization, right? Which promotes green hydrogen globally, setting safety standards, increasing investments, and combining forces. Having worked so extensively and being a huge proponent of environmental friendly method of operations, how do you think manufacturing businesses can address the climate crisis? What specific goals and measures do you think you should support for reducing carbon emissions specifically?
Let me mention a few companies which have got it right from different continents. In Europe, Ørsted is a Danish company. They were an oil company 10 years ago. Then they made a decision, no, we don't want to be in oil any longer. We want to be in the future industries. And they remade themselves as a wind company, and it's now one of the 3 or 4 biggest wind makers in the world. In Indonesia, a company called RG, that's the biggest paper and pulp company in the world, and maybe one of the biggest palm oil companies in the world. They made the same decision. They have been a major problem for the rainforest of Indonesia in the past because the paper and pulp and palm oil was destroying the rainforest, but then they said, no, we don't need to destroy the rainforest to keep our value chains. We can destroy them. And they even made themselves one of the biggest conservation forces for the rainforest. They have a huge rainforest in Sumatra, which is protected by the company, and it's much better protected and was protected by the government because RG has all the fire brigades and all the helicopters you need to make sure that nothing is destroying the forest. And in India, in Tamil Nadu, Ola, or the headquarters is in Bengaluru, but the production is in Tamil Nadu. In 8 months' time, they have set up a fantastic factory, clean, green. 2,000 young women are working there to produce electric scooters. Soon they will produce electric batteries, and in the future, electric cars. What's common for all these three companies, Ola, RGE, or Ørsted, I think, is the decision. The top leaders want to go green, and they are not looking back. They are not facilitating. They just move ahead with their vision, and then people follow. Customers, shareholders, employees, they're all following. All the staff are working in the same direction. And then you see these companies searching into the green economy, but of course there are many other examples in the world.
And how can developing countries set fair sustainability goals for manufacturing industries? And how should these be different from that set for developed countries?
I think that question is largely old-fashioned, because in the 20th century, because if you wanted to develop, it had to be based on coal and oil and gas. There was no other way to get the energy for rapid economic growth. And that's why that happened first in Europe, and later in America, in China, and in other places. But in the 21st century, renewables are much cheaper than coal everywhere. Solar energy in India is the cheapest energy which has ever existed on this planet. And that means that you can go green and create jobs and value at the same time. And that's also why you see the two biggest and most important developing nations, China and India, they both see the green transformation as an opportunity, not as a problem, not as a cost, but as an opportunity to get new jobs and prosperity and capture markets. I mean, China is now dominating every single green market in the world. 82% of all solar panels last year were made in China. 70% of all electric batteries were made in China. China didn't have a traditional automobile industry like, say, Toyota in Japan or Volkswagen in Europe. So they decided to leapfrog into the future to capture the green market, and have done that from a Chinese perspective brilliantly. India is doing a lot of the same. Prime Minister Modi understands that green hydrogen, solar energy is a huge opportunity for creating jobs in India, bring every Indian out of poverty, that's going green at the same time.
Awesome. I'm gonna just take a next step into supply chain and the implications around that. But there are various socioeconomic and geopolitical disruptions, or even the recent environmental disaster that affected almost everybody around the world, and that has made supply chain, especially for businesses, it has made supply chain now as a topmost priority for manufacturers. In fact, supply chain leaders now have a seat in the boardroom, primarily to ensure that their way of operations is seamless, agile, and resilient during crisis. Now, having worked with different governments and businesses and nonprofits, what's your perspective on an ideal and sustainable supply chain, which is built for the future?
I think anyone thinking about this need to understand that the future will be a lot more transparent. I mean, in the past, you could sell a product anywhere in the world, and the customer would have basically no knowledge about the product, where it was produced, how it was produced, who did produce it. But today, in the future, if you buy a jacket, you will be able to use an app, and you will know exactly not just what country it was produced, say it was produced in Bangladesh, but at what factory it was produced. What are the salaries of the women who made that factory, and are there any known environment problems of the factory? All customers with an app approaching a shop will be able to get this kind of information, whether it's food or clothing, or for sure if you buy an iPhone, you will be able to get all this kind of information. Not all customers will care. Not all customers are environment friendly. not all customers care that the people who make the iPhone, many do, and they will drive the market because the producer cannot afford not to be in the most advanced, most demanding markets and not satisfy all customers. So if you think that your business can hide and cheat people in the future, you will be on the losing side of the business. The future will be a lot more transparent. And this is not just future ideas, this is already happening in many parts of the world. Customers get more and more information, and it's more and more, of course, stored in apps and in digital programs.
Got it. And how do you see government supporting this with infrastructure investments and policies that won't compromise on our environment?
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, all who do business need to prepare themselves for these completely transparent value chains, and that means you need to take an interest in every part of your business to make sure that it stands up and that you can convince your customer that this is fine. This is a great way of doing business. Governments need to support business, and governments need to focus on all the infrastructure, which only governments can do well. I mean, as an example, because China has built infrastructure in a way which is absolutely amazing in the last decade. Infrastructure in China is much, much better than, say, in the United States. I mean, the most incredible is, of course, the high-speed rail system, which links every single city in China with a speed of 300, sometimes 350 kilometers per hour. Every big city has massive metro systems to make sure that the public transport is going well. China has built out the by far most advanced 5G system for digital communication. So on state providing for infrastructure, China is a role model for the world. But others need to get up early in the morning to compete with the Chinese, otherwise we will lose. And I see also India moving very, very fast in the same direction. India, for instance, has a huge number of advantages compared to the rest of the world. It's one big market, 1.5 billion people in the market. That's a very demanding, very big market. That's a market at an enormous scale, and that brings down the cost. If you produce electricity by solar power, say in Tamil Nadu, you will be able to sell it in Gujarat or Meghalaya in the future. While, of course, in Africa, there's nothing like that. There are basically 54 states of Africa, 54 different markets, a lot of the same in Latin America. And even in Europe, we struggle somewhat with getting one market in Europe. So India has an enormous advantage in the scale of the market, driving down prices for the benefit of the people of India, but of course also making Indian business very, very competitive in the world.
Absolutely. Are there any initiatives that you think that India as a country, or the Indian government should invest more in terms of money or initiatives or policies?
Yeah, I think a couple of the issues I mentioned are absolutely critical. I mean, the Indian population will be more and more urban in the years to come. It's still less than 50% of Indians living in cities, but in the future, there will be 50, 60, 70% of Indians will live in city. Not all of them will live in mega cities like Delhi or Mumbai or Chennai, but they will live in cities of 500,000, 1 million all over India. Right. Then you need to focus on improving the infrastructure in these cities, making a lot more affordable busing, electric buses, metro systems at large scale, because people cannot be stuck in traffic with this heavy pollution, and that's and also an enormous economic waste. So I think improving waste management and improving public transport in the cities of India is very important. I just look into the statistics. I'm living in Oslo, the capital of Norway. If Oslo had been an Indian city, it would have been 140 in the rank of cities, means that 140 Indian cities bigger than Oslo. So there's an enormous amount of Indians living in these cities, and they need much better infrastructure. But I know that the Prime Minister is onto this, and I see also, for instance, now metro construction in Chennai, in Bengaluru, in Mumbai, in Nagpur, in so many cities I visit, you see this happening. Just not so, but just to speed up, make it even more urgent.
Absolutely, I think the current government is on the right path to making India, to make India compete with the other countries, especially like China, as you mentioned. One more question that I have, Erik, is that you have served as a mentor, as an advisor, and even honorary professor at several universities in India and other countries. Can you share some anecdotes and experience of having worked with students that make you look forward to a promising future?
Yeah, let me just share one story from this year. I mean, early this year, I was visiting a city called Siliguri, that's in northern West Bengal, and I met a young person there called Sailesh Singha. And Sailesh, he was a recent graduate from University of Bengaluru, and he was working, and he's still working in his father's furniture business in Siliguri. And then when we met, we decided to work together on environment issues, and he started what is called Youth for Green Hydrogen. Green hydrogen is, of course, this amazing product which in the future will power aviation and shipping and heavy trucks and many industries, and it's very, very, very green and impact with nature. And Sailesh, he decided to move on this, and the strength of this, I think, is the first kind of global green youth organization started from India. But in a few months' time, he was able to mobilize and virtually connected with young people in 70 different nations in the world, and to bring this message of the green hope for the future coming from green hydrogen, starting in Siliguri, yes, but of course spreading to the entire world. So it shows the power of a dedicated individual. Some people ask, can I do anything? Can what I do has a meaning? But there's no one else who will change the world for you. I mean, if you want to change the world, you need to start yourself. And that's what Sailesh Singhal did, and with amazing results at a very short period of time. I'm so happy to support him.
Yeah, and as the saying goes, right, be the change that you want to see. A huge shout out to Sailesh Singhal. I'll definitely look him up, and I'll definitely make sure that the post also tags him along. What are the initiatives?
It's a true Gandhian way of thinking. I mean, Mahatma Gandhi said, as I said, you need to be the change we want to see in this world, and that's the most. No one has made a better statement about change than Gandhi.
Absolutely. So again, what are other initiatives that you are driving to engage and inspire the young generation, Erik?
I think, I try to inspire on all the green technologies which we just mentioned. Hydrogen, solar, wind, electric mobility, like the Ola driving the change into electric scooters, and change for nature. India has had some astonishing successes recently. The number of tigers in India is double. Same in Nepal. That's a great development, particularly because tigers are so difficult to protect because it's a very dangerous animal. But I think tree planting and greening of landscapes is a core issue, because everyone can contribute. Everyone can plant a tree in their village or in their garden, or they can at least demand that the village authorities or city authorities make parks. And so it's a political movement, but you can also do something yourself. I mean, as I mentioned, I think the Chief Minister, Mr. Solheim of Madhya Pradesh, is planting one tree every day. Well, that's a small little forest just by himself, but much more importantly, of course, he is inspiring 80 million people in the state of Madhya Pradesh to do the same.
Absolutely.
Tamil Nadu has promised to increase the tree cover in the next 10 years with 10%. That's amazing. But for that to happen, well, you need big-scale planting systems, but you also need to mobilize all citizens to do a little bit by themselves. So my very strong encouragement to everyone, look into how you can plant a tree in your garden, in your neighborhood, in your village, wherever you can do it.
Thank you so much, Erik. You truly are an inspiration to many. And I'm certain that after this episode, a lot of our followers, especially in the supply chain community, will have a stronger focus on sustainable practices, especially in manufacturing industry. And, as you just advised, I mean, even the smallest change of planting one single tree in your garden, in your neighborhood, in your village will go a long way in building a greener future and a greener earth. Once again, thank you so much for joining Crossroads. We'll be back soon with another episode. Stay tuned and stay safe.
Thank you.